I was picked at a few days ago in California by some youngsters that had signs that said, "Make love, not war." The trouble is, they didn't look like they were capable of doing either.
Politicians are, you know, the scum of the earth, let's face it. I mean, they are the dirtiest. They got stories on each other. They keep files on extramarital affairs and murders in creeks. They do all of these things, you know. And here we are, you know, a bunch of lonely rockers out here trying to make a buck. I'm not a crook. Jimmy Carter.
Just a little bit.
Rock and roll is like the tribal drum. It's the thing that it hammers out the messages and the themes, you know, of our lives, and it's something it's pretty constant.
All you people, keep on dying.
We're here to provide the soundtrack, almost in a conscious way, for what we'd hoped to do during that span of time, during Nixon, during Watergate, during that brief moment of hope with Jimmy Carter before things got dark again.
I think that we owe a lot to people who were saying, you know, be like us. We're the youth, and we are calling the politics of the day to task. I think we first realized that we could mobilize as a generation and get something done.
The beginning of the 70s was occupied in trying to finish the tasks, the activities, the mission of the 1960s.
There's a legacy of commitment, you know, to social ideas that at the heart of that is in personal empowerment. Because all I need is a guitar to tell you my story.
And it's a hard, it's a hard, it's a hard, it's a hard race that I found.
And it was a magical time. That whole explosion for me in my life, and for most people in that era, the explosion of color, of art, of what it meant to be, you know, alive and have life full of art and meaning.
Well, after the whole enthusiasm of things like Woodstock, and when the generation and was coming together and this music was kind of the voice of the people, I know in the early 70s people still really wanted to believe and did believe.
There's no heaven. Sees if you try.
Well, I think Lennon is a huge influence on the 60s and 70s, even though there were periods when he was off the map. He was one of those icons that was still hovering in people's heads.
Imagine all the people living life in peace.
I'm 31 now, and I've grown up in many ways apart, and you have to be more politically aware in a day and age like this. It's almost impossible to close your eyes to it.
I hope someday you'll
at the beginning of the decade, because of all of the political movements, because of the women's movement, because of because of the anti-war movement, which was really big, it brought a lot of people together. Consequently, the bands reflected, the times of, the political times.
Brother, 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 that's far too many of you died.
60s activism matured in the 70s in terms of a greater worldview of what we had cared about so deeply. We were, protesting a war half a world away, an unjust war.
I think it was around 1969 and 1970 when I stopped thinking so much about my erotic fantasies, and I started to think about the war in Vietnam and my brother, who used to tell me, respond with some pretty horrible stories about the war.
You know we've got to find a way. Got to find a way. Bring some understanding. In a day, we've got to make it sad. Make it sad. Don't punish me with brutality. Oh, talk to me so you can see what's going on. What's going on? What's going on? Yeah, what's going on, baby?
The decade was about coming to grips with, to some degree, about institutional lying.
In our pursuit of the phantom of military victory in Vietnam, we've turned aside from the values which America stands. My Lie and the Cali trial are but the latest episodes in the fundamental immorality of the war.
Lieutenant Cali believed he was following orders to destroy all living things in the village. Lieutenant Cali states that he did not feel as if he was killing humans, but rather that they were the enemy with whom one could not speak or reason.
The Vietnam War was pretty universally distrusted and then just in general just opposed, by a majority of Americans, and it was for many people the first experience trying to give voice to their beliefs and their ideas and wanting their government to do one thing while the government was committed in another direction.
When that war fails, you see, those generals are going to turn that war internally, and it's already beginning here at home. That war has come home, and we've got to resist and fight.
The Pentagon Papers, a 47-volume study of slipping and sliding through the marshes of Southeast Asia. The government tried to stop publication of the study, leaked by Dr. Daniel Ellsberg to the New York Times.
Because I felt that the concealment of this information for 25 years has now led to the death of 50,000 Americans and several hundred thousand Vietnamese.
Of course, the American public, those of us who were paying any attention, felt very betrayed by the lack of information and, these sort of out-and-out lies that surrounded this whole Vietnam War.
This war in Vietnam, I'll have no part of that. It's wrong. Why are we fighting these people? What's going wrong here? I want to do a little thinking about this. I'm not reporting to the draft board.
I didn't go to Vietnam. I made it was an effort on my part to avoid going to Vietnam. And I didn't, I was happy about that. I didn't believe in it.
Ooh, let's send you down the wall. And when you ask how much should we give, ooh, the only answer more. Hear me, I ain't no military son. Hear me, I ain't no portrait in war. Hear me, I ain't no portrait in son.
whenever I ask him what he's doing up in Canada. It ain't like he's a deserter from the army or something, is that?
No, sir. I'm not a deserter.
Well, I didn't think you was. I was just trying to figure out.
I'm a draft dodger.
What do you know about that?
Vietnam in the 70s was the premium question of the decade. And Archie Bunker, of course, you know, was very much for anything his government was for and his president was for. And Mike was not. That was perhaps the single biggest ongoing argument in All in the Family.
The FBI was to find him here, we could all be having Christmas dinner in a hoosgow.
Daddy, it's Christmas Eve. Now, don't go making a big crisis out of it.
Look, Arch, what David did took a lot of guts.
What do you
My
mean,
own
a lot
father
of
doesn't
guts?
understand. Why should he?
I
When the
don't
hell are
blame
you
him.
going to admit that the war was wrong?
I ain't talking about that war. I don't want to talk about that rotten damn war no more.
No one likes us. I don't know why. We may not be perfect, but heaven knows we try. But all around, even our old friends put us down. Let's drop the big one and see what happens.
You lost any friends?
Quite a few. We lost one the other day. The whole thing stinks, really.
I was very impacted by Vietnam. I mean, I can't even count on two hands the amount of people from my high school who were dead because of Vietnam. My best friend got killed in Vietnam.
Angel came down from heaven yesterday. She stayed with me just long enough to rescue me. And she told me a story yesterday about the sweet love between the moon and the deep blue sea. And I said, fly on, my sweet angel. Fly on through the sky.
We, the Vietnam veterans against the war, are returning the war home to express the truths of the Vietnam War we know too well.
Just got home from Vietnam. I come home and find my brother gone. Whoa, oh Lord, hey, yeah, yeah. Hey, 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 the bus is coming. The funky system has gotta fall now. Or it's gotta be changed to include us all.
It was a fabulously interesting time, culturally and musically. But it was also really about death. And I think that we didn't know just how real the death was going to be.
Twin soldiers and Nixon's coming. We're finally on our own. This summer I hear the drumming. For dead in Ohio. Gotta get down to it. Soldiers are cutting us down. Should have been done long ago.
I was involved. You know, I was carried off the campus. Everyone was walking across the commons with their portfolios. It was half-term. And these guys had loaded rifles. They just shot into a very crowded commons on a Monday afternoon.
All of a sudden I heard the shooting, and then I saw people dropping to the ground, and then I fell to the ground also. I couldn't walk anymore. I crawled behind this car, and I don't know, that's about it.
And finally it was over, I got up to run away, and this guy says, you know, my God, this girl's shot, and he picks her up, and she has this bloody spot on her jacket, and there's blood coming out of her mouth.
Gotta get down to it. Soldiers are cutting us down. Should have been done long ago. What if you knew?
Jeff Miller, one of the fellows that was killed, he was such a big fan of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, you know, and I knew that, so, you know, that made me happy. I know it sounds corny, but, you know, it meant a lot to us.
It wasn't a big hit, and it didn't get an enormous amount of airplay, but people realized that that hippie dream that CSNN had created was dead. It was dead with those kids. And I think that that was even more upsetting in certain ways than all the other assassinations combined, because we realized that there was no safe place anymore for us.
Old man sitting by the side of the road with the lorries rolling by. Blue moon sinking from the weight of the load, and the buildings scrape the sky. Cold wind ripping down the alley at dawn, and the morning paper flies. Dead man lying by the side of the road with the daylight in his eyes. Don't let it bring you down. It's only castles burning. Find someone who's turning, and you will come around.
We were a little more realistic about things. We liked cars, we liked girls, we liked beer, we liked money, you know? And whereas the hippies were going, oh man, it's all earth things, you know? And this, we were going, come on, I want a Ferrari.
Pushed the day of peace just one day closer, then every bone-crushing effort in this campaign was worth the entire sacrifice.
I've never known a national election when I would be able to go to bed earlier than tonight.
People have said, well, the whole idealism of the late 60s and everything, it kind of, you know, it just didn't pan out the way people thought. Well, I think a lot of it did pan out as well. There was a lot of changes, and there was a lot of attention brought to things like Kent State, that you just can't get away with this anymore. There was up to a certain period of time where you could just get away with anything.
I had no prior knowledge of the Watergate break-in. I neither took part in nor knew about any of the subsequent cover-up activities.
Well, what made Watergate so shocking was that we hadn't had a president of the United States who abused his authority or constitutional prerogatives in a way that Nixon had, who led a criminal conspiracy.
Yes, and here's to the government of Richard Nixon. In the swamp of their bureaucracy, they're always bogging down, and criminals are posing as the mayors of the towns, and they hope that no one sees the sights and no one hears the sounds, and the speeches of the Spiro are the ravings of a clown. Whoa, here's to the lad who torn out the heart of Richard Nixon. Find yourself another country to be part of.
Watergate grew out of Vietnam. It began as a way of Nixon dealing with his opponents who opposed him primarily on questions having to do with the war and the anti-war movement.
Into the midst of this kind of equation comes a big liar like Richard Nixon, and they suddenly, you know, create this atmosphere of government by falsehood, by espionage, by, you know, cloak and dagger.
These transcripts will show that what I have stated from the beginning to be the truth has been the truth.
I am a lonely visitor. I came too late to cause a stir, though I campaigned all my life towards that goal.
And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
I think what happened with Nixon and everything was the beginning of people not trusting politics.
We need underground journalism and rock journalism, and we need the lively arts to, you know, to keep us honest.
You were telling us how they twisted the meaning of what you said.
That's right. Yeah. You see, my administration had the greatest sense of humor that this country has ever seen. You see, we'd actually play to the microphone.
There is no denying the fact that the White House, Ehrlichman, Haldeman, Dean, are all involved in some of the early money decisions.
How much money do they need?
Well, I would say these people are going to cost $1 million.
The podium rocks in the crowded waves. The speaker talks of the beautiful sage.
The Watergate tragedy is the greatest tragedy this country has ever suffered.
For the hotel queens and the magazines, test tube jeans and slot machines, where even Richard Nixon has got soul. Even Richard Nixon has got it.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
I hardly slept the night you were. Our secret's safe and still will care. Where even Richard Nixon has got soul.
He was a very fascinating man, very strong individual, completely driven, you know, not unlike a pop star. When you really look at him, and you know, the darkness that, you know, he's almost like the classic pop star Nixon.
Even Richard Nixon has got soul.
I, Gerald R. Ford, have granted a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon.
And I don't know a soul who's not been battered. I don't have a friend who feels at ease. I don't know a dream that's not been shattered or driven to...
That pardon kind of said it all, that we were no longer, it was back to business as usual.
It robbed the country of its adolescence, of that maturation stage of saying that everybody is accountable.
Still, when I think of the road we're traveling on, I wonder what's gone wrong. I can't help it, I wonder what's gone wrong.
President Nixon was formally pardoned for all Watergate crimes today by the People's Republic of China. Honoring the ailing former leader, the Chinese have named a new dish after Mr. Nixon called, of course, Sweet and Sour Dick.
And then something happened in the middle of the 70s. There was a drastic change over here. And it went from we're all involved, we're all in this together, to I don't know. There was just a big I don't know.
Do you remember your President Nixon? Do you remember the bills you have to pay, or even yesterday?
For a period of time, people got so bummed out in 74 and 75, they just decided to disengage. But they disengaged in a very interesting and a very, you know, honest way. I mean, disco was sort of dancing on tombstones.
Just you and your idle symbols set so loud. Leather everywhere, and not a miss left from the ghetto.
I mean, we played Roosevelt Stadium, as I recall, the night that Nixon resigned. And it was a festive event, let me tell you. And then I got the distinct feeling that everybody said, well, okay, it's nap time.
Trouble with you is the trouble with me. Got two good eyes, but we still don't see. Come round the bend, you know it's the end.
I think everybody got into drugs or hedonism, and everybody withdrew a little into themselves.
When you took acid in the late 60s, you were expected to have a religious experience. When you took acid in the 70s, you were just loaded.
Some say these kids are reaching an all-time high, on pot that is, with half the students in America having tried it, 10 times the number who experimented in the 60s.
I think that in the mid-70s, that the drug culture, which in the late 60s was kind of experimental and in innocence, lost that innocence, and it got very dark.
I caught you knocking at my cellar door. I love you, baby, can I have some more? Oh, the damage done. I hit the city and I lost my band. I watched the needle take another man. Gone, gone, the damage done.
My name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president.
When the war was over, we started looking inward a bit more, and that did result in the me generation, which kind of it went pretty far into the me, and I think my songs dovetailed fairly well into that, because being a person who was introspective and sort of looking for answers.
And I wonder if I'm really with you now, or just chasing after some finer day.
I think the me decade had a lot to do with this sort of real and pseudo-spirituality that started happening. You know, a lot of people started getting into alternative ways of thinking metaphysically and all that kind of thing. You know, being very involved in the self, to the good and the bad. And so, you know, that was definitely me-ism.
Whatever gets you through the night, it's all right, it's all right. Get your money all you like, it's all right, it's all right.
Too many of us now tend to worship self-indulgence and consumption. Human identity is no longer defined by what one does, but by what one owns.
People have been living with too much kind of abandon, personal abandon. It has been a me decade.
And I think the media is very fond of, you know, saying that everybody that was, you know, radical in the 60s became a yuppie and gave up these, you know, values. I mean, that's not really the case.
Well, the air's taking, baby, cling to the heart and the soul of the spender.
One thing I would say about Joni Mitchell, Jackson Browne, and artists like this that wrote certainly really kind of personal and disillusioned kind of songs in the 70s, I think it was an outgrowth of what had happened to the 60s idealism.
Are you there? Say a prayer for the pretender who started out so young and strong, only to surrender.
He was really talking about that whole kind of me. It was really the me decade. just kind of one-night stands, cocaine parties, and freaking out.
On a dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair, warm smell of eucalyptus rising up through the air.
Don Henley and Glenn Frey in their lyrics certainly captured metaphors without being specific. And certainly the whole, kind of Hotel California period, in, the mid to late 70s, sort of decadence, that was going on. And they used California as a metaphor in Hotel California kind of to tell that story.
Heaven, or this could be hell. Then she lit up the candle, and she showed me the way. There were voices down the corridor. I thought I heard them say, welcome to the Hotel California.
I just think we sort of grew up, the songs we wrote and sang when we were 23 and 24, 25. They have a certain optimism, maybe a certain naivete about them. And then I think as we grew more experienced and more confident, the themes were sometimes darker, more provocative.
They used their own personal narrative of their own experience to talk about what the whole country was doing in terms of, inventing a lifestyle that you wanted to believe in, and, the fast lane. I mean, they had a great knack for finding those phrases, life in the fast lane, the hardening of the artistry.
Some dance to forget. So I called up the captain. Please bring me my wine. He said, we haven't had that spirit here since 1969. And still those voices are calling from far away. Wake you up in the middle of the night just to hear them say, welcome to the Hotel California.
70s was love generation to start with, and then it went into disco, and then it went into punk rock. I mean, how can you categorize the 70s as one thing, It started out with love and ended up with hate. Hello.
I am ordering that we discontinue purchasing of any oil from Iran for delivery to this country.
Now it was time to shuffle the deck. It was time for something to come along again and try and stir up some dust. And that was the beginning of the punk era, which was desperately trying to stir up some dust.
No, I'm blank, There's nothing coming in, there's nothing going out. No commitment, no involvement. That's where it's at.
The coolest thing about punk rock back then was that it was something you'd never seen before, and it totally was, on track for changing music 100% across the board. Everything that you knew about music up until then, punk rock was there to erase.
I am an anti-coaster. I am an anarchoaster. Don't know what I want, but I know how to get it. I want to destroy, pacify, 'cause
Personal politics is something I like to deal with, because I think if you don't change things in your own front doorstep, you really should not be pointing fingers at others. The 70s really had that opportunity to do so, because the 60s was so damn confusing to us young kids, watching those adults make such fools of themselves, that I suppose we had to come out of the whole thing level-headed, because we certainly weren't going to follow in their footsteps.
London calling to the faraway towns. Now war is declared and battle come down. London calling to the underworld. Come out of the cupboard, you boys and girls.
Me and Lydon, I guess, we entered the scene at the same time. It was all over. You see, they'd had their summer of love, you know, over in America. It burst big. And by 72, 3, man, it was like an army. I always felt it was like coming on the field of a great battle 12 hours after the battle was over, you know? So the casualties were all lying on the field, but the battle was gone, or whatever it was gone.
Police of these and the street. Oh yeah, scaring the nation with their guns and ammunition. Police of these and the street. Oh yeah, scaring the nation.
Openly political bands like The Clash, you know, they came along. In America, punk was not so political, and it still isn't. You know, the punk that survives today is more teenage frustration.
Now I wanna be your dog. Now I wanna be your dog. Now I wanna be your dog.
I think the operative word was bad. Everybody wanted to be, you know, yeah, that band's bad, that music's bad, I'm a bad guy, you know, don't mess with me. There was kind of a tough ethic.
Well, the U.S. punk wasn't quite as politically motivated. It was more ethically or, you know, creatively inspired, although there was some politics involved in the long run because we wanted to, I mean, we wanted to be heard.
At any moment in the culture, music is 7 or 8 different things happening all at the same time. In the 70s, you have a pop, high school-driven phenomenon of disco. At the same time, you have heavy metal music emerging, and you also have somebody like Bob Marley.
People realizing the journey that this music had taken, college students realizing it, they suddenly woke up to the fact that popular music didn't stop with our hemisphere, that there was a popular music, a rock and roll in the whole lower half of this hemisphere.
Another song of freedom is all I ever have.
He was one of those people that wasn't on nobody's side in particular. He was on everybody's side. And that's scary to the system.
You can fool some people sometimes, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And now you see the light. Stand up for your right.
Somehow, you didn't always trust the papers, you didn't trust television, the radio, but there were musicians that each of us had that spoke for us. Even though, you know, in a 3-minute song, you're not going to deal with a complex issue comprehensively, you can get the emotion of the issue and focus it in a way that will sometimes encourage people to get active.
Stand up for your right. Stand up for your right. Stand up for your right.
Maybe the 70s was the beginning of people saying, let's, on some grand scale, do something for people that really need it.
Just give me the one power of the sun.
We are concerned about the status of the fuel in the core. There's extensive fuel damage.
Pregnant women and preschool children stay out of the area.
I think of holding my breath, and then you won't get radiation unless it leaks through your skin.
In the early 70s, there was the Bangladesh benefit that George Harrison put together. It seemed that the cycle of major artists doing that tapered off in the mid-70s after Watergate, but at the end of the decade, the West Coast artists in particular became involved with the environmental movement, culminating in the No Nuke shows at the end of 1979.
Just give me the one power of the sun.
John Hall from the group Orleans, and Bonnie Raitt, James Taylor, Carly Simon, Springsteen, and Jackson Browne. I'm a big Jackson Browne fan. His early work clearly was very introspective and very much about sort of personal enlightenment. And it's interesting that coming out of that deep introspection, he became the most politically active of artists.
We're a bunch of people that feel a need to see something change and to promote certain values, certain principles. And we're doing what is in our power to do.
When that road turned onto the road I'm on.
The money that is being raised is going to support all of the local anti-nuclear groups around the country, and I want to express my gratitude, and I know you feel the same way.
I don't think political stances really mesh with music too well, except where we respond to the outside world sort of slapping us in the face, and we react to it the same way you would or anybody else would. We just have a more effective way to do that.
I got a job working construction for the Johnstown Company, but lately there ain't been no work on account of the economy, and all them things that seem so important, well, mister, they vanish right into the air. I just act like I don't remember. Mary acts like she don't care.
I grew up in the 60s, and hey, it was supposed to mean something. It was supposed to be about something. It's supposed to be true to some idea and a voice for something that you believed in and that meant something in people's lives. And that's how the music flourishes. That's how something grows out of it that means something.
I picked up the guitar because I loved Pete Seeger and Joan Baez, and they were my heroes. Bob Dylan, and they were raising their voices to try to rally people behind an issue and enliven their spirits and, you know, deepen their hearts and get their commitment up.
There's going to be an incredibly wonderful rally on Sunday at Battery Park.
The musician, instead of being seen as providing answers, became a link, a connecting mechanism between people, problems, and some sense of their own power.
I think that the decade that we're moving into will see an awful lot more activity. I think just by the nature of the swiftness with which issues become realities and the direct effect that things are going to begin to have on people's lives. I think that things are going to go down a lot more quickly.
Comes a time